interested in that master's that you did. What do you think you learned from that that you think you can concretely point to influencing you as a teacher? Because you were very successful.
Very good. Well, I don't know if I was successful, but I enjoyed it. But I think that I learned several things. One is that I learned that people learn in different ways. And I was fascinated by some of the learning theory courses that I took. And as I took those classes, I could identify in my own classmates that couldn't learn anything without the book. I found others that could take very good notes, and that's all they would need. And then there were a couple of very bright people in my class who didn't seem to need to study, but they listened very carefully and did very well. Those would be just three examples of the way people learn. So that was very helpful. One of the other things that really became helpful in my career is that in my master's degree, I had the opportunity or the responsibility of doing a fair amount of not only educational measurement techniques, but learning some statistics. At that time, I don't know what you do with statistics in the curriculum now, but we did very little in the medical school curriculum. And I found that to be very helpful, particularly as I developed my own research career and started to write research papers and read the work that other people had done. But I think those things helped me a great deal. I think a third thing that helped me, and I wouldn't ever want to be offensive to any of the psychiatrists in the room, but in the counseling courses that were part of educational psychology, I thought they were focused more on people that were generally normal with challenges rather than real crazy things. And most of the patients that I've had to deal with and most of the students that I've dealt with have been fundamentally normal without at least being certifiably crazy. And so those would be the things that I think I learned in my master's program that have been helpful to me both as a faculty member and even today.
Excellent. Now, after you were a faculty member for a while, you became the dean.
I became the dean.
And what kind of an experience was that for you, from transitioning from a faculty to being the dean?
Well, that was an interesting experience. Probably it's important for me to mention, I'd mentioned to Karen and some others that my career was a little bit atypical because when I came back to the University of Utah after finishing my training, and frankly that was truncated a little bit for some interesting circumstances that are probably not replicable today. But in order for the Department of Medicine and the Division of Rheumatology to put the package together for me, I think they needed some help from the Dean's office. And the Dean's office needed to do some revamping in its admissions process. Everybody, as it is probably today, thinks that whatever subset, whether it's cultural or university or politics or whatever else, whoever you are, you're discriminated against by the admissions committee.
It's all Wayne's fault.
It is. It is.
Be clear about that.
Yeah.
Today, it's all Wayne's fault.
Well, it has always been his fault. But at any rate, Dr. John Dixon, who was the dean at the time, and I'd met him before, had enticed me to come back. And so I began my career half-time in the dean's office.
As the dean of admissions.
As the dean of admissions. And within a couple of years, there was a turnover in the deanship. And you know, using the phenomenon, this is how I got all of my administrative jobs at the U, I think. The devil you know, you prefer over the devil you don't know. And so I became the interim dean for a year. I was still an assistant professor, and it was quite interesting. Yeah, but Dr. Dixon was the vice president by then, and so he was able to help me, and that worked well. I had agreed to be in the dean's office for 2 years and to do admissions, and so at the time that ended, I thought I was going to be free to go and pursue what I really wanted to pursue. And then I understand that you had an accreditation visit last fall.
Yeah.
We had one coming up in a year, and I understand you recently had to review your curriculum. We had to do the same, and aha, there's that nasty master's in educational psychology. And so I was, well, I agreed with some encouragement to become the assistant dean for education and chairman of the curriculum committee and take us through some modifications. That's when we started the organ system, which I think you still do in some form.
Yeah.
and get us through the accreditation. And so after that year, and we got through that, I went back and spent almost 2 full years doing my teaching and my research and quite a bit of patient care. And then we changed deans again. And I became the interim dean. And we did that for a short period of time, about a year, I think. And then I went back to the department. In the meantime, we'd had a challenge in one of the departments, not my own in medicine, but I was the acting chairman of a different department here at the medical school for a year. Fascinating because, and I won't go into all of the dimensions of all of why that was the case, but it was deemed necessary.
Educational psychology.
No, I think they didn't, we've ruined one guy's career, why would we mess up somebody else? I think that's what that was about. But during that next period of time, and it didn't have anything to do with educational psychology or probably even rheumatology, but we were trying to get a long-term care gerontology center grant here at the university. And some very good people had tried and been turned down. And finally, when the university looked into it, they were told by the National Institute of Aging that unless you have a director who has had a funded R01 grant, you're not going to be seriously considered.
I see.
And
didn't matter if that was in gerontology
didn't matter.
or not.
No, it didn't matter. But if you've been through the funding process, and because I was not, I guess, making much of a contribution where I was, but I'd had my research funded by the NIH, I became director of the gerontology program for a couple of years. While I was still doing that, then we had another deanship. The deanship around here is very, very dangerous, and so I just mention that just in case any of you are crazy enough to think you might want to do it. It's a great thing, but just realize that it's perilous duty, and it's particularly tough here because many of the departments have their own money. It's much easier to be president of an institution where you control the purse strings, but. That's an offside.
Where were you when I signed my contract?
But at any rate, it was a very fascinating kind of thing. The university president called me one day and said, we're going to be doing a search for another new dean, and are you going to be a candidate? I said no. I'd just been promoted to full professor. Had a very, I think, a very good program. We're involved in some multi-center studies in rheumatology with some new drugs, some of which are old drugs now. And I said, I think I've been a good citizen, but I'd really like to focus on my career if I could. Good. Well, I thought you were going to say that. Would you then chair the search committee?
Oh.
And so I did. And it was a fascinating phenomenon. Dr. Don Detmer, who some of you might know, and I think Dr. Lee probably knows him. Don had been a friend of mine because he was also a vascular surgeon, but he was in his training at Duke University when I was doing my training in medicine. And we used to see each other quite regularly in the emergency room when the Durham Knife and Gun Club would meet on the weekend, and would get the surgeons down there to deal with things that some of the rest of us wouldn't dare touch. So we were good friends. And but he had just come to Utah, and I mention that because some of the chairs who were on the committee, I didn't understand it when we started, were reluctant to have brand new people from outside in every position. And we did a pretty good job. We selected a man that I thought we were going to take, and then the committee decided he wasn't quite our fellow, and while we were debating about it, the University of Colorado hired him. And then about 3 months later, we went through the process again, and I thought we had a very good fellow. He happened to be a rheumatologist, so he had to be good. But while we were fiddling around, the University of Michigan hired him as the dean.
Oh, dear.
And so I was kind of up to here with it, and told the group that I was going to retire. And they need to get somebody that could get this thing to closure. Because, by the way, I was also the interim dean again during this search. And to make the long story short, the group, after I'd been to the president and stepped down, then said, we'd rather, with all his limitations, we'd rather have somebody we know. We can manage this guy. We might not be able to manage somebody else. So that's how I became the dean.
That is a great story.
And that's basically how I became the vice president. So do anything to get him out of the deanship, you know.